Chapter 311. Orissa glanced at the man standing in the doorway of his room and hesitated. Eventually, she walked toward him. Yes. Benjamin did not say anything as he walked into the room and started taking off his clothes. Orissa was stunned momentarily, staring at his perfect body shape. What a sexy man. He has the perfect combination of muscle and fat. That's the ideal body for every woman. Get the bath ready, he instructed with a low voice. Orissa glared at Benjamin's muscular back before walking into his bathroom. Benjamin took off his belt as his eyes followed Orissa's movements. He took off his pants and threw them aside. Without hesitation, he walked right into the bathroom. Orissa turned around and almost ran into Benjamin. Her heart skipped a beat before quickening. As her eyes landed on his exposed body, she hurriedly averted her gaze. She could feel a warmth in her cheeks as she flushed. The water is ready. Shooting her a look, he moved forward and stepped into the bathtub. Since he was about to start bathing, Orissa immediately walked outside. Where are you going? Benjamin leaned against the bathtub's edge and turned his head around to stare at Orissa, who was slipping away. Orissa halted her feet and turned around. She blinked a few times when she noticed the slight hint of annoyance in Benjamin's gaze. I am going to sleep together with the kids. Come over here. Benjamin's gaze darkened. Orissa stared at him with a confused look. However, Benjamin had already turned his head away. Why? Help me wash my back. Benjamin ordered domineeringly. Orissa's mouth twitched slightly upon hearing that. The previous time she bathed him, he asked her to go out halfway. Yet, now he wanted her to wash his back. Orissa let out a sigh and walked over to him. Are you sure? Benjamin turned around and glared at her with a sharp glint in his eye. Orissa, just do what I say. Stop spewing nonsense. His tone sounded highly demanding. Orissa was amused upon seeing his enraged look. Okay, don't be mad. Grabbing a towel, she then pushed on Benjamin's shoulder slightly. Sit away from the edge. I can't wash your back if you lean back like this. Benjamin obeyed her instruction obediently and shifted forward. Orissa bent over and used the towel to wet his back with water. Then, she squeezed some shower gel into her palm, applied it to his back, and started rubbing it with a towel. Orissa felt quite relieved as she noticed the red spots on his body had faded a lot. Have you taken your medicine tonight? Benjamin did not respond to her question. She pursed her lips. It looks like he has not. Harder. Benjamin's voice sounded a little hoarse. What is she doing? With how little force she's using, she might as well be tickling me. Orissa pursed her lips and put some more force into her hands. As she rubbed his back, she also massaged it a little. Benjamin's eyelids lowered to half-mast as he enjoyed the massage. Orissa rubbed down his back as her body leaned toward him. As she did so, a faint but wonderful smell drifted into Benjamin's nose. His eyes darkened terribly as he felt like he was teetering on the edge of a fire pit of lust. As her hands started moving downward, Benjamin's breathing gradually sped up. His body stiffened as he felt her fingers gliding across his waist. Immediately, he grabbed her hand and stared at her. Narrowing his eyes, he said with a sexily hoarse voice, Are you washing my back, or are you seducing me? Seducing. When did I seduce you? Orissa was pissed upon hearing that. How did I seduce you? I am washing your back. Staring at her innocent expression, Benjamin felt a desire burning in his body. With a sudden hard yank from him, the woman fell right into the bathtub. PFF'd. She accidentally swallowed some water as she went under. Before she could recollect herself and scold him, he pressed her against the bathtub's edge. What are you doing? She stared at him wrathfully. You made my clothes wet. When Benjamin shifted his gaze toward her body, it darkened. Chapter 312. Orissa's face turned red as she saw him staring at her body. Pervert. You were the one who seduced me. Why are you now calling me a pervert? Benjamin grabbed her chin and leaned toward her with a wicked look. Warm puffs of air from his breathing hit her face, making the situation more amorous. Orissa looked into his eyes. I hate to admit it, but he is so handsome. I can't even take my eyes off him. He looks even more attractive when he is acting devilishly. Her heart pounded furiously as she refuted, Since when did I seduce you? That is a baseless allegation. Benjamin snorted softly and stroked her lips with his thumb, clearly hinting at something. He stared at her intensely. Her delicate little face looked even more charming when soaked with moisture. Meanwhile, Orissa's heart skipped a beat when she made eye contact with him. Before she could evade him, he kissed her on the lips. He entered her mouth, thrusting his tongue inside eagerly. Her mind went completely blank as she did not know how to react. The strong scent of masculinity surrounding her was so dense that she could not escape from it. Damn it! Benjamin hooked her waist with one hand to prevent her from sinking into the bathtub. His other hand held her head as he continued to kiss her passionately. Her lips are so soft and taste so good. Benjamin forced his long leg between hers, pinning her firmly against the bathtub's edge. Orissa was overwhelmed with shyness and fear. She wanted to push away the man who was losing control, but her entire body felt weak. Benjamin let go of her lips and started exploring her ears and neck. His hot breath caressed her face, causing her to feel slightly ticklish. A warm, tingling sensation swept through her. However, right as they were about to go too far, a childish voice sounded outside. "Mommy, Mommy." The two froze on the spot. Orissa immediately pushed away Benjamin, who was above her. Her face was flushed completely red. "Mommy, are you in there?" The young voice came closer to the bathroom. Orissa was beyond panicked. She was afraid whoever it was might come in and see them. "I'm here. Is there something wrong, sweetheart?" Orissa forced herself to calm down and respond with a normal voice. Benjamin furrowed his brows. He was not anxious at all. Instead, he was only displeased at being interrupted. "Mommy, what are you doing in there? We've been waiting for you for so long." Gavin stood on the other side of the door. "I am taking my bath." At that moment, Orissa could have died of embarrassment. Seeing how nonchalant Benjamin was, she cut him a glare. "Huh, didn't you take your bath in your room?" "No, I thought the bathtub over there was not good enough, so I came to take my bath here." Orissa lied awkwardly in front of Benjamin. When he noticed the alluring flush on her cheeks, he could not stop himself from leaning forward to kiss her. Startled, Orissa immediately pushed him away and moved a distance away from him. "Sweetheart, why don't you go to bed first? I will be there in a minute." Orissa was afraid Gavin might come in to see Benjamin was with her. "Okay then, Mommy, please hurry. Otherwise, Benjamin might scold you if he comes up later and sees you in there." Gavin had not forgotten that Benjamin was germophobic. The latter never allowed anyone to touch the things in his room. Orissa shot a glare at Benjamin. "If he dares to scold me, I will scold him back even harder." Benjamin leaned against the bathtub in a relaxed manner as he raised his eyebrows. His sinister gaze kept staring at her as though she was a piece of prey that could not escape his grasp. Orissa's heart skipped a beat, and she quickly looked the other way. "Okay, I got it," she shouted toward her son. Her voice trembled, slightly from nervousness. After hearing the footsteps leaving, Orissa heaved a sigh of relief. "Are you nervous?" Benjamin laughed at the woman who was behaving guiltily. "It's all your fault. Wash up yourself then." Embarrassed beyond recognition, she stood up and wanted to leave. Yet, Benjamin grabbed her forcefully. The next second, she fell right into his embrace again. Chapter 313. "Where are you going?" Benjamin hugged her seductively. Her heart missed a few beats before beginning to race uncontrollably. As she recalled their intimate actions just now, her face turned even redder. "Let go of me. I need to go to the kids' room." She used her hands to push him away. However, as she touched his muscular body, her heartbeat increased its pace once more. "They are not babies anymore. They can sleep on their own." Benjamin's face fell, and he looked utterly displeased. Orissa stared at him. "No matter how old they are still kids. I promised them I would sleep together with them tonight." Shoving him away, she hurriedly stood up and stepped out of the bathtub. Benjamin furrowed his brows tightly. "These kids are so much trouble. If you sleep together with them, what about me?" Orissa stopped in her tracks as she heard his voice. Turning back to glance at him, she let out a chuckle as she spotted Benjamin's displeased expression. "You are not a kid anymore. You can sleep on your own." She stared at him with a smile. Benjamin's face darkened even more. But I am a patient. You should take care of me. He proceeded to give Arissa a domineering stare. At that, Arissa could not help but find him adorable. She uttered gently, "Finish your bath first while I coax them to sleep. After they are asleep, I will come here and help apply the medicine for you." How's that sound? The kids were still waiting for her. If she did not show up, they would come here again eventually. She did not wait to see if Benjamin agreed or not as she walked out after she finished speaking. Benjamin's frown eased a little. However, his brows furrowed again when he looked beneath the water. If it were not for Gavin interrupting, he would have conquered her already. Images of her curvaceous body flashed past his mind, and heat surged through him as his breathing grew erratic. He could not take his mind off her. Never had he been so obsessed with a woman before, nor had there been one who could make him lose control so easily. Damn it! His breathing became rapid as he closed his eyes slowly. The veins on the side of his forehead bulged slightly, lending an air of savageness to him. His reddened face made him look even more attractive. After a while, Benjamin let out a low growl. He rested his forehead on his hand, looking satisfied but also a little sullen. Arissa went back to her room and got changed into dry clothes. Then, she walked toward the kids' room. The 5 kids were lying in bed, trying their best not to fall asleep as they stared at the door hopefully. Upon seeing Arissa, their eyes lit up. "Mommy!" Arissa's heart melted as she heard their delighted cries. She stepped into the room and lay down beside them. "You guys should just sleep if you were sleepy. Are you not going to sleep if I don't come? We were waiting for you." Gavin yawned as his eyelids began to droop. "We said that we would wait for you, so we would keep our words." Zachary smiled mischievously. "Mommy, you are finally here. Now we can sleep." Oliver took off his glasses and squinted at her, appearing very adorable. Jesse and Jasper crawled into her embrace and nuzzled against her. "Mommy, sleep with us." "Okay," Arissa answered softly as she gave each one a hug and a kiss on the forehead. "Good night, sweethearts." "Good night, Mommy." The 5 kids also kissed her on her cheek. Then, they were finally willing to sleep. Arissa took the quilt and covered the kids. She felt warm yet heartbroken upon seeing them dozing off within seconds. Her heart swelled in her chest as she caressed all of their faces gently. Surrounded by her beloved kids, her lips curled into a satisfied smile. She continued patting their backs gently. As she listened to their snoring, she slowly fell asleep too. Benjamin had finished taking his bath by then. He furrowed his brows when he did not see Arissa waiting for him. Drying his hair, he walked outside. Chapter 314. Benjamin went straight to the kids' room. His face darkened as he saw Arissa sleeping with the kids. The way they had practically glued themselves to her had him frowning even deeply. "She said she would help me apply the medicine. Was that just to brush me off? Why does she never keep her words?" Benjamin was very unhappy, and there was no way he would let himself continue to suffer. He leaned forward and pinched her face. Arissa, who had just fallen asleep, woke up due to the pain. Her eyes snapped open. Before she could regain her senses, Benjamin pinched her again. She swatted his hand away and hissed, "What are you doing? It hurts." What a mean man he is. How could he pinch me while I was asleep? "Come and apply my medicine for me." Benjamin tossed out that sentence and walked out. Arissa's lips twitched as she stared at his back. "Can't he ask nicely?" She rubbed her face gently and tried to get down from the bed. That was when she realized the 5 kids were all hugging her. Carefully, she moved them aside without waking them while slowly shuffling toward the edge of the bed. It took her a long time to get out from their hugs as they were hugging her quite tightly. She nearly woke them several times, and she had to pat their backs gently until they fell asleep again. After covering the kids with the quilt, Arissa closed the door and walked out of the room. Then, she went to Benjamin's room. "Close the door." Upon seeing her enter the room, Benjamin gave a brief instruction. Arissa's heart skipped a beat as she glanced at the man reclining back in bed. He was only clad in a towel, exposing his beautiful bodyline. With one of his legs hooked across the other, he looked extremely alluring. "Damn it," Arissa cursed within her heart. "Why did you ask me to close the door? She averted her gaze as she walked toward Benjamin. Why else do you think? Benjamin stared at her closely, his dark eyes like bottomless pools. They seemed to want to suck her in, and she found herself lost in their gaze for a moment. Snapping out of it, Arissa's face blushed red. She immediately turned around to pour him a glass of water to take his medicine. Of course, it's for sleeping. Upon hearing that, her hand jerked slightly, causing some water to accidentally spill out. Luckily, the water was not very hot, or else she would have burned her hand. Such ambiguous words. Is he seducing me? She turned around to look at Benjamin. A few seconds later, she walked toward him again with the medicine and the water in her hands. Hurry up and eat your medicine. Benjamin furrowed his brows as he looked at the pill in her hand. Arissa tried hard not to laugh as she saw Benjamin hesitant to eat the medicine. If I laugh, he would be even more reluctant to eat it. Hurry up and eat it. If you recover by tomorrow, you won't need to eat medicine anymore. Eating medicine is better than getting injections, right? She cajoled gently while offering the medicine to him again. Benjamin rolled his eyes at her. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be like this. Arissa was overwhelmed with guilt upon hearing Benjamin's complaint. I'll be more careful from now on. I didn't know about it. If I knew his allergy was so serious, I wouldn't have taken his life for granted. Benjamin's eyes flickered after hearing her sincere apology. He took the medicine and put it into his mouth. Then, he took the glass of water from her and drank from it. Arissa displayed a smile. Drink it all. Water is good for you. Benjamin initially wanted to drink half of it only. However, after hearing her sweet voice, he continued to drink some more. Arissa waited for him to finish the whole glass, then she took the glass and placed it back on the table. She grabbed the ointment and sat beside him, starting to apply it on him. Benjamin was momentarily stunned when Arissa's fingers touched his chest. His already dark gaze darkened further. Does it hurt? Arissa glanced at him with a confused look. Benjamin bit his lip and snorted. Not at all. It's not like I was injured. It was just that her touch was tickling him. Chapter 315. Are you still itchy? Arissa asked as she continued to apply ointment. Benjamin stared at her beautiful face as she concentrated. An incomprehensible look flashed across his eyes at the slightly pinkish part of her cheek. It looked as though it had been pinched. He lifted his hand to caress it. Arissa's movement paused as she looked up puzzledly at him. What happened here? Benjamin locked his gaze with her. She shot a glare at him. You pinched it, remember? He arched a brow. Did I pinch her that hard? Caressing it gently, he asked, does it hurt? Her heart clenched at his gentle touch. Trying to conceal her racing heart, she snapped, it does. His strokes got even lighter, like a feather brushing against her cheek. She glanced at him before resuming her motion of applying ointment on his skin. Lie on your front, she said while scooting further away, giving him space to stretch out. He cast her a glance before turning around to lie on his front. She continued to apply ointment to his back methodically. We're done. You can put your shirt back on. After putting away the ointment, she headed to the bathroom to wash her hands. He sat up from his prone position and put on his pajamas as he looked in the direction she went. At that moment, she came out of the washroom and met his intense gaze. Come here. He patted the spot beside him. Her heart started pounding as she stared at the man sitting on the bed. Why? She crossed the room to him, acting nonchalant. He merely indicated for her to sit as he reached for the ointment. Let me apply some for you. Touched by his offer, she complied and sat beside him. Her hand went to the spot he pinched earlier. You don't have to apply ointment here. As he leaned closer to her, his masculine scent surrounded her. Feeling him so close to her, her heart began to race. He was so handsome that she couldn't avert her gaze from his face. Once he finished applying the ointment, he said, let's sleep. Putting away the ointment, he lay back on the bed and pinned his dark gaze on her, as if he was waiting for her to join him. Feeling nervous, she quickly dropped her gaze. Good night, Graham. She shot to her feet and rushed to the door. His gaze was glued to her back as she moved. Are you planning to leave me, the patient, here all alone? She looked over her shoulder at his question and flashed him a smile. "Aren't you feeling better already?" His face darkened at her words as he narrowed his eyes at her. "Who said I was feeling better? I might come down with a fever in the middle of the night." She was rendered speechless. A fever in the middle of the night. Why would anybody curse themselves so? "I'll go grab a pillow then. You sleep first." With that said, she turned to leave. "Why would you need to grab a pillow?" Benjamin arched a brow at her, feeling confused. "I need one since I'll be sleeping on the couch." "I can't sleep without a pillow," she said quietly. "You can have half of my bed." He sent her a glance, then lay on his side, leaving his back to her. Her heart pounded at his suggestion. Her gaze darted between him and the other half of the bed as she contemplated. "He's inviting me to sleep on the bed." She looked at the couch with an assessing gaze. "I can sleep there, but it won't be as comfortable as sleeping on the bed." Eventually, she could hear his breathing even out. After weighing her options carefully, she walked toward the bed. Confusion rose within her as she looked at his back. Why did he offer me to sleep here? She climbed onto the bed with questions running through her head. Hearing the rhythmic breathing beside her, she quickly fell asleep. When Arissa's breathing had evened out, Benjamin finally turned around. His gaze softened, staring at her quiet, sleeping face. He instinctively stretched his hand out to caress her face. His thumb rubbed at the spot he pinched earlier with a gentleness that even he didn't notice. She turned to her side and unconsciously snuggled against him. A feeling rose within him as he watched her unconsciously rely on him. His gaze was uncommonly gentle. He pulled the blanket over her, covering her carefully. "There's this scent that I keep smelling. I wonder if it's her or because a woman is in my bed." Many thoughts and emotions assaulted him, agitating him. It took him a long while before he could finally fall asleep. The next morning, Arissa woke up feeling suffocated. She opened her eyes and was instantly met with a close-up view of Benjamin's handsome face. Blinking at the view a couple of times, she tried to clear the haze from her mind. Chapter 316. Arissa finally realized Benjamin was kissing her. At that realization, her eyes widened with shock as the heat began to spread from her face to her neck. Benjamin opened his eyes and met her gaze with a burning intensity. "Close your eyes," he ordered with a husky voice. Her heart began thumping louder in her chest, and she squeezed her eyes shut. He wrapped an arm around her waist and another at the back of her neck, holding her head in place before he leaned in to land his lips on hers. Her brain was all fuzzy from the passionate kiss. His touch on her back snapped her out of the moment like a bucket of cold water. She shyly yet determinedly pushed him away. "You rascal!" She swiftly pulled the blanket over her head, hiding her entire face. His temper sparked after having his kiss interrupted, but it was quickly extinguished as he observed her adorable actions. Delight flashed across his eyes. "You're the one who kissed me first." She immediately pulled the blanket down, staring at his handsome face with disbelief. "You're lying. There is no way I would do that." He arched his brow wickedly. "Well, you didn't push me away when I kissed you either." She couldn't come up with a retort since she truly had been drawn into the moment by his kiss. Shooting him a death glare, she snapped, "My brain was still groggy from sleep." A thought came to her. She sat up and looked down at the man lying down beside her. "Aren't you disgusted by me? You didn't look all that disgusted with me a minute ago. Could it be that you've fallen for me?" He merely stared at the smug expression on her face silently. After a few seconds, she couldn't hold his intense dark gaze any longer and awkwardly averted her gaze. Realizing she would lose if she averted her gaze first, she swiftly shot him a fierce stare. Thinking she had done well, she whirled around, then left his room. The moment the door fell shut, she patted her face in an attempt to cool her bright red cheeks. After a while, she dashed to her room to wash up and change. Looking refreshed, she turned down the hall toward the kids' room. She opened the door silently and peeked through the crack. Seeing the kids were still asleep, she silently closed the door and descended the stairs to the kitchen to make breakfast. She had just reached the stairs, landing when a loud greeting startled her. "Good morning, Mrs. Graham." Arissa looked at the burly man with a puzzled look, nodding belatedly. "Good morning to you too. You look beautiful today, Mrs. Graham." Jack chuckled as he fixed his stare on her. Others would have assumed Jack to be a rich, dumb man if it wasn't for his honest smile. She was curious about his identity but merely nodded at his praise, then continued down the stairs. Casting a sideways glance at him, she wondered who he was since she hadn't met him before. Jack merely smiled at her. Mrs. Graham is quite beautiful. She's a good match for Mr. Graham. No wonder their children are so good-looking. Orissa walked toward the kitchen with Jack following her while he asked, Mrs. Graham, are you hungry? Breakfast is not ready yet. I'm not hungry. I want to prepare breakfast, she answered. Jack muttered an acknowledgement and said, Edwin will prepare it soon. You don't have to do it yourself. Just tell him what you're craving, and he'll have the kitchen staff make it for you. Right, but I want to do it on my own, she replied with a smile. Jack rubbed his nape awkwardly. I'll help you. No, it's fine, she rejected. A look of disappointment crossed his face. She was stunned by his disappointed look, which made her feel like she had hurt him. Do you hate me, Mrs. Graham? Jack questioned cautiously, not knowing how to answer his question. She said, No, it's nothing like that. I don't even know who you are. How can I hate you? Awkwardness filled her. It was then Jack recalled he hadn't introduced himself. Patting his chest, he introduced, I'm Jack, Mrs. Graham. Much like Ethan, I have been working with Mr. Graham for a long time. She nodded. Why haven't I seen you before? Jack grinned. I was out on a business trip overseas. I just got back 2 days ago. Mr. Graham requested me to search for you immediately after my return. She was shocked. Did Benjamin ask Jack to search for me? Chapter 317. Good morning, Mrs. Graham. Edwin came over and was surprised to see Jack. Jack, when did you arrive? I came over in the early morning. Jack grinned. Edwin nodded, then introduced Jack to Orissa. Mrs. Graham, this is Jack. She nodded awkwardly. Why did they keep calling me Mrs. Graham? If Benjamin hears it, he'll say I allowed them to do it. Calling me Orissa will do, she corrected as she turned around and headed to the kitchen. Edwin's eyes darted between her and Jack. Jack leaned closer to Edwin. Is Mrs. Graham staying with Mr. Graham? Edwin looked at the curious Jack. You should ask Mr. Graham instead. You're here all the time. Don't you know? Jack pursed his lips. Edwin chuckled and answered, I'm not sure. With that, he whirled around and headed toward the kitchen too. Mrs. Graham, you must be hungry. I'll prepare breakfast immediately. Jack dashed over. Mrs. Graham, have the kids woken up yet? She looked at both of them, pondering who to answer first. Her gaze finally landed on Jack. They're still asleep. She turned to Edwin. Edwin, I'm not hungry at the moment. I'm just used to preparing breakfast for the kids. Let me help, Edwin offered enthusiastically. She smiled and accepted his offer. Did you sleep well last night, Mrs. Graham? Edwin studied Orissa's face with a teasing gaze. He wanted to know if Orissa slept with Benjamin last night. Something flashed across her eyes when she answered with a smile, pretty good. Excellent. Edwin grinned and didn't pursue the question any further. Jack dashed up the stairs to the kids' room. Opening the door, he peeked his head through the crack to see 5 similar-looking kids sleeping in a row. Jack's heart melted at the sight. He sat down by the bed and couldn't help his grin as he watched the sleeping quintet. Benjamin had changed into sportswear and was coming down the stairs when he saw Orissa bustling about in the kitchen. He frowned at the sight. Orissa. She looked over her shoulder when she heard him calling her. He was standing in the living room and was watching her with an intense gaze. He gestured for her to come over. Mulling over it briefly, she turned the gas on small, then went to the living room. What's wrong? She stared pointedly at his handsome face. Come exercise with me. The words were casual, but his tone was commanding. She frowned unhappily at his tone, then gave him a once-over. Have you recovered enough to exercise? He arched a brow and inched closer to her. Didn't you feel it earlier whether I have fully recovered? Her cheeks flushed red immediately. She glared at him and snapped under her breath, crazy. What? His cold, deep voice had her swallowing the last word. You can't exercise yet. Doctor's orders, she advised through gritted teeth. I didn't hear the doctor say that. Mirth filled his eyes as he watched her temper spark at his quip. You were asleep. She glared at him in a way that said that was the honest truth. Chuckling softly, he then spun on his heels to head toward the pool. Bring my breakfast to the pool. He had changed his mind. He didn't want to jog anymore, he wanted to swim instead. Orissa gritted her teeth in frustration. She didn't want to obey his orders, but knowing she was living under his roof, she had no choice but to comply. Turning around, she stomped toward the kitchen as she cussed him out in her mind. In no time at all, she had prepared a breakfast platter and a glass of milk before placing them on a tray and bringing it to the pool. However, when she reached the pool, she didn't see him anywhere. Her brows furrowed as she wondered, is he messing with me? She studied her surroundings and sighed. The rich truly know how to enjoy life. Even the pool looks luxurious. Chapter 318. Benjamin. Orissa called as she walked to the edge of the pool. She peered into the water, trying to find Benjamin, but he was nowhere to be seen. Where is he? She muttered with a frown. When she was about to leave, Benjamin popped out of the water. His sudden appearance startled her, and she almost spilled the milk on her tray. She quickly steadied the tray before shooting a glare at the man in the water. Benjamin wiped away the water from his face, then flashed her a teasing smile. Were you frightened, coward? Staying silent, she merely looked at him with her lips pressed into a thin line. Spinning around, she set the tray down on the small table. Here's your breakfast. I have other things to do. Wait there. After his command, he dived under the water again and resumed swimming. Orissa looked over her shoulder and saw his elegant strokes cutting through the surface of the water. His skills were on par with professional swimmers. With a resigned sigh, she sat down on one of the chairs and decided to enjoy the view. She slowly lost herself in his movements as she watched the water flowing across his proportionated body. He looks even hotter when he's swimming. His body looks so powerful. She couldn't help but daydream. A moment later, she quickly patted her face to snap herself out of the daydream and consciously tried to slow her racing heart. What was I thinking? How embarrassing. A few minutes later, Benjamin finally finished a dozen laps. As he got out of the pool, water began dripping and sliding down his toned body. He strode toward her, clad only in a black swimming trunk. Orissa's heart pounded at the delicious sight, and she could feel her cheeks heat. This man is the devil. Her averted gaze instinctively returned to his body. His body is perfect. He leaned down and grabbed the armrests of the chair she was sitting in, effectively trapping her. Is the view nice? His intense gaze as he studied her face had her blushing even harder. Her heart clenched. When she met his gaze, her heart was beating so hard. Just average. His expression darkened at her words while his lips twitched. What kind of body do you like then? Noting the annoyed expression on his face, Orissa blurted out a celebrity's name. His body is the best. She exclaimed with admiration sparking in her eyes. Benjamin's expression darkened even further at her love-struck look. Guys like that are nothing admirable. He straightened and reached for the folded towel on the side. After a cursory wipe, he simply tied the towel at his waist. His movements were smooth and masculine. She discreetly peeked at him a few times. I think he's good-looking. I like guys dressed in the clothing of ancient times. They always look so beautiful. I know the public doesn't look too favorably on them since they're not very masculine. Well, I admit their bodies weren't as good as Benjamin's, but that's not the point. She didn't want his ego to inflate anymore, so she had purposely said it just to spite him. She sneaked another glance at him and caught his dark expression. The corners of her lips twitched. Is he jealous? Or is he just being a chauvinist? Don't you think he's good-looking? He looked so beautiful dressed in the clothing of ancient times. He slid a dark glare at her. She swallowed a knot in her throat at his look and immediately forced an awkward smile. After shooting another glare at her, Benjamin finally averted his gaze. His face was still hard as he scoffed in his mind. That kind of guy is beautiful. Only women will describe guys as beautiful. She glanced at him. Why did you ask me to wait? I still have to prepare food for the kids. He suddenly threw his towel at her. Help me dry my hair. The towel landed right on her face. She quickly removed it, recalling him using it to dry his body just a while ago. At that thought, she glared at him. What? He turned to face her with a sharp gaze, his presence commanding. Scared, she instantly got up and went over to dry his hair. Hurry up and eat your breakfast. It won't taste good once it gets cold, she advised. Chapter 319. Benjamin glanced at the breakfast and asked in a low voice, "Who made this?" Orissa gazed at the man's attractive side profile and replied softly, "I did." It was the butler who was supposed to prepare breakfast. However, as he claimed that he wasn't free, the woman had no choice but to do it herself. Benjamin's expression relaxed slightly as he took a bite of the sandwich. He raised his brows slightly, impressed by the delicious taste. "Does it taste fine?" As Orissa had not added too many ingredients or condiments to the sandwich, she wasn't sure if it suited his tastes. "Yeah," Benjamin replied casually. While the man ate, Orissa stood behind him and helped to dry his hair. Edwin was standing by the window as he spied on the couple. He smiled to himself after observing that the two were getting along harmoniously. Just then, Darius called to ask about the situation between Benjamin and Orissa. After the butler reported the situation to him, Darius was overjoyed. Orissa only put down the towel after making sure that Benjamin's hair was almost dried. "Is there anything else?" Benjamin did not reply. Orissa pouted slightly in frustration, wondering why the man was behaving in such an arrogant manner. "Hey," she poked the man's head lightly with her finger. Benjamin turned around and glared at her with a sharp glint in his eye. When Orissa met the man's gaze, her heart skipped a beat. "You, don't poke my head," Benjamin warned sternly. Orissa gaped slightly before replying obediently, just in case the man got triggered again. Okay, she had done it instinctively and not intentionally. To her, it was unnecessary for the man to have such a huge reaction. After all, it was just his head. "Is there anything else you would like me to do? Otherwise, I'll get back to breakfast preparation," she continued. The woman wanted to make something for the kids before they woke up. Benjamin grunted softly before replying, "Don't we have servants in the house? Why do you have to do it yourself?" As Orissa was at a loss for words, she retorted, "If that's the case, why did you ask me to make you breakfast?" He should take back what he said earlier on if he's that great. Benjamin was stumped upon hearing that and did not know what to reply. As it wasn't a situation he encountered often, he pressed his lips together and kept quiet. "Enjoy your sandwich then, I'll head back first." Orissa could not be bothered with the man and turned around to leave. This time, Benjamin did not stop her. He merely turned his head and took a brief glance at the woman. Then, he returned to eating his breakfast. Orissa bumped into Ethan at the door. "Good morning, Miss York." "Good morning," Orissa replied with a smile. "I'm here to look for Mr. Graham," Ethan informed the woman. "Oh, he's over there by the pool." Orissa pointed toward the direction of the pool before heading back into the house. When Ethan walked over to Benjamin, he saw that the man was enjoying his breakfast in a relaxed manner. The latter seemed to be in a rather good mood, judging from the smile on his face. "Mr. Graham," Ethan greeted. Benjamin slid a glance at his assistant before asking, "Do you know a male celebrity by the name of?" Ethan froze for a moment and stared at Benjamin in confusion. Why is he asking about this? According to Ethan's understanding, Benjamin had never been a fan of celebrities and did not pay attention to entertainment news. "I do know a bit about him," Ethan quickly replied. "He is signed under Mr. Watts' agency and is quite popular lately." "And his career," Benjamin ordered coldly. "What?" Ethan was shocked. "Mr. Graham, why?" Benjamin shot the man a sideways glance and replied, "Do I need to have a reason for doing that?" Ethan gulped when he saw Benjamin's darkened expression and said a silent prayer for that male celebrity in his heart. He was certain that that man must have offended Benjamin somehow. Having no choice, Ethan rang Kingsley. Kingsley fell into depression straight away after being woken up early in the morning and informed that one of the most popular celebrities under him was being banned. "Why?" he asked. Ethan shot a look at Benjamin and replied, "He has offended Mr. Graham." "What?" Kingsley's frustration kicked in upon hearing that. He was completely unaware that the celebrity, who was under his charge, had offended Benjamin. Just when he was about to clarify the matter, Ethan had already hung up and was telling Benjamin about his schedule for the day. After the assistant finished speaking, he asked Benjamin, "Mr. Graham, did Jack come here and leave already?" Chapter 320. Ethan found it rather strange that he had not seen Jack since he arrived. Earlier this morning, Jack had called to inform him that he would be making a trip to the house to visit Gavin. Benjamin frowned and fixed his gaze on Ethan. "I didn't see him." Ethan blinked, feeling perplexed at the situation. By right, Jack should have greeted Benjamin when he first arrived at the house. At that moment, Jack was sitting by the bed and looking at the 5 little ones with a smile on his face. He would never get tired of looking at them. Jessie was the first to wake up. The first thing the little girl saw when she woke up was a strange man with stubble covering his face smiling at her in a scary manner. Jessie screamed out loud at once. "Ah, there's a bad guy." She immediately moved closer to her brothers, waking the 4 of them up. "Get away from us." Zachary, Jasper, and Oliver moved in front of their sister instinctively while grabbing whatever they could to defend themselves against Jack. Gavin had also picked up his baseball bat. He was about to swing it at the man when he suddenly realized who it was. Uncle Jack. Gavin steadied the bat in his hands after making sure that it was indeed Jack. Meanwhile, Jack was slightly taken aback by the girl's scream earlier on, followed by the boy's attacking stance toward him. He finally snapped out of his shock after Gavin called out to him. The man immediately smiled and greeted Gavin. "Good morning, Gavin." Zachary, Oliver and Jasper glanced at Jack before turning to look at Gavin. "Do you know him?" the 3 boys asked in unison. Before Gavin could answer his brother's questions, Jack spoke first. "Yup, he does. My name is Jack. You guys can just call me Uncle Jack." Jack smiled warmly at the children. However, due to the stubble on his face, he still looked like a perverted bad guy to the kids. "He's Uncle Jack. There's no need to be scared of him." Gavin tossed his baseball bat on the floor and started comforting Jessie. Jessie cast a fearful glance at Jack before inching closer to her brother. "Gavin, his smile looks so scary. He was staring at me when I opened my eyes just now." Gavin patted the little girl's head and reassured her gently, "Don't be scared. He's not a bad guy even though he looks fierce. Both Uncle Jack and Mr. Frank work for Daddy." Gavin turned his head and glared at Jack. "Uncle Jack, you should have told us you were coming. Do you know how scary it was for us to have you appear here suddenly? How could you just sneak into our room unannounced?" Gavin was rather upset at the man for scaring his sister earlier on. "Sorry, I overlooked that. Please accept my apologies. You kids are so adorable that I couldn't take my eyes off you." Jack replied apologetically. Zachary, Oliver and Jasper sized the man up quietly. Even though the man was large in stature, he looked harmless and seemed to be rather dumb. "If you were not someone we know, we would have given you a good beating. Don't you dare scare our sister again," Jasper warned the man fiercely. "I won't do it again. Please forgive me." Jack tousled the boy's hair with an affectionate smile on his face, which got him a glare from Jasper. After patting Zachary and Oliver's heads as well, Jack asked Gavin, "So, Gavin, are they your younger or elder brothers?" Gavin glanced at Jack before answering seriously, "They are my younger brothers. I'm the eldest." Jack finally understood. He took the children in his arms and looked at them with fondness. "Quick, call me Uncle Jack." Zachary, Oliver, and Jasper glanced at the man before greeting him obediently. "Hello, Uncle Jack. Good boys." Jack wanted to kiss them on their cheeks, but the little ones turned their faces away in disdain, avoiding the man's lips. "Uncle Jack, your stubble is so prickly." Oliver stared at Jack wide-eyed. As the boy was not wearing his glasses, he was unable to see the man clearly. Jack chuckled awkwardly and replied, "I'll shave later." Gavin asked, "Uncle Jack, when did you reach? Did you see my daddy yet?"